Hi, and welcome to the board wrap-up for the month of April 2013. Our guest is the Superintendent of Ponca City Public Schools, Dr. David Pennington. And as we sit here and we get ready to talk about the April board meeting, it's hard to believe, but we are about 6 weeks away from school concluding this session, too.
You know, it's always amazing, and I don't know if it's because I'm getting older that time is moving faster. But yeah, when we get together next time in May, I think we only have about 8 days of school left. So, you know, we're always. It's funny, you know, when you've done this as long as I have, you get into a school calendar routine. I don't even know what it's like to have a regular job that just goes on. And even though I'm here 12 months, I still think of things as a school calendar. You know, the year is over in May, and when school starts in August, you get that anticipation of a new school year, just like you did when you were teaching or you were a student getting ready to start the school year. So, you know, it's an exciting time, and of course the big deal is that this week the testing window opens, and so for the next couple of weeks at different times throughout the district, our schools, our students are going to be very involved in the state testing process. And you know, I would just, for those viewers who have grandchildren or children who are in the school system, you know, it's really important that, you know, they get to bed maybe on time if they've been kind of gotten in a bad habit of staying up later because the sun's out longer or whatever, that we really get into bed early, we get them up, feed them a good breakfast, so that they can go to school and perform the best they can on the state exams that they take. And you know, unfortunately, those exams are being used for more and more things they weren't designed for. You know, what the purpose of the test should be to tell us where that child is and help us develop educational plans that will help an individual child develop to their fullest potential. That's what state testing should be about. Unfortunately, because it's there and it's easy, we're using state testing to evaluate schools, and we're using state testing in the future. We're going to use it to evaluate teachers. Of course, all that does is it means the adults in the room put more pressure on the children in the classroom, and it's unfair and it's not right. I don't know when the day is going to come that parents across the country say, we're tired of this, it's not the right thing to do for our kids, but it's going to have to be parents that step up and say that, because your elected people are not going to do it. They're just, I mean, they've heard these arguments, they'll sit there and shake their hand and go, well, we understand. But they're so locked into accountability. They think that we have to have some matrix that proves what's going on in schools. And you know, that sounds good. I mean, you know, probably somebody that's in business would sit out there and go, well, yeah, you've got to have matrices to show how you're doing. But we're not talking about a product. You know, we're talking about people. We're talking about human beings. And the strength of our education system has always been that we have multiple entry points, that when somebody does not do well, they're allowed back in. We give multiple chances. We encourage students to follow their dreams. And that's created a society that has developed more patents than any society in the history of the world, that has had more entrepreneurs than any society in the history of the world. And you know, we're moving to a system that's more like what you see in China, which has great test scores, but they don't have any creativity. They don't have any. They don't. You know, this. I remember my granddad used to talk to me about common sense and book smart. And those are different things. And I just think we have to be careful. I'm not against academic standards. We have to hold our kids to high standards. We have to raise the bar. We have to teach them to think more analytically. Bottom line is, these kids are smarter than any children in the history of the world. They can do more. We've learned that you can give kids tougher challenges, but we've got to do that in a framework that still allows for that individualism. And I'm afraid we're going to miss out on that if we're not careful.
Now, this testing that is done by the state, is that in cooperation with the testing that our teachers will do, that passes or doesn't pass students to go on to a next grade?
No, I mean, they are separate issues. When we think about it, when you and I went to school, and our teacher you know, we took an American history class and we took tests or did assignments and we got a grade, and if we passed that American history class, you know, we had to have, you know, so many credits of English, so many credits of history. Well, we still have to do that, and that's all individually teacher driven. But in addition to that, you know, students last year for the first time had to pass 4 of 7 end of instruction tests. So in addition to taking a American history class, you now have to pass an American history test that is a state exam. And again, you know, some would argue, well, you know, that's better. We know that teachers sometimes maybe they give somebody extra credit points and that helps them pass a class. And that's true. I mean, you know, I've done that as a teacher. I've done that when I had a student that struggled. You know, I've given them an additional assignment or additional two or three assignments, whatever it was, to allow them to earn enough points so that they would earn a passing grade. I don't think there was anything wrong with that. You know, I think there's a big difference between doing something to help a student pass a course who does additional work as opposed to a student who doesn't make an effort or doesn't do anything. But the purpose of the test is to guarantee that students have a certain set of knowledge before they pass the class and then before they get a high school diploma. Again, that sounds good. I'm just glad they didn't do it when I was in school. I'm thinking about how much I disliked geometry and anything math related. And I might still be in high school if I'd had to pass an Algebra 1 test or a geometry test. Because I didn't like those courses. I did not like them. I was not going to do, you know, I wasn't going to be an engineer. I wasn't going to, I knew those were things I was not going to do in my life. And I was a typical high school kid in that I kind of sat around and go, why do I need this class? Now, obviously as an adult, you know, I know why those things are important. And I was smart enough that I made sure that maybe while I didn't do well in math, I made sure that my kids do well in math, and I'm very proud to say that my oldest son is a professor of mathematics. So again, and the other part of this is, while we call those the Oklahoma State tests, they're not written by the state of Oklahoma. They're produced by a testing company that writes tests for all across the country, so that you know, it's not really necessarily we set the score and that's about it. So that's, you know, those are just some things. We're in testing and they're big deals. I mean, because again, they're going to be used for purposes other than what they were designed for, and that's unfortunate, because again, the most important thing on that test is being able to take those results and look at an individual student and to say this is this student's strengths, these are their weaknesses, these are, as we go to the next school year, what things can we do as teachers to address those weaknesses so that that child has the academic skills they need to be successful later on. The other stuff we use the test for, to evaluate schools or to evaluate individual teachers, is so secondary to what the main purpose of the test is. And the tests are great indicators of telling us about students, but they're not designed to tell us about schools, and they're not designed to tell us about teachers. So in essence, it's an improper use of testing to do that. But again, the political climate we're in right now, that's what we do, and so because that's the law in the state of Oklahoma, we will continue to do the best we can to conform with the law and to do those things. It's just unfortunate.
April's usually a pretty laid-back month for the Board of Education. I know there were some housekeeping things that were done, the voting on a president for our board and a vice president, the swearing in of Judy Troop, and congratulations to Judy for being reelected. If you could, maybe some of those issues that took place in the April board meeting.
Well, just I'd like to address, first of all, Judy's reelection. You know, I was very proud of our community because they came out and voted. Now, look, turnout was not great. You know, we had somewhere around 14% of the registered voters in Kay County or in the Ponca City School District voted. In February, when we had the bond issue, it was about 15%. So we had about a 1%, maybe not even quite that little, maybe not quite that big of a drop. But we had right at 2,000 voters. I was, my prediction would have been that we would have had 1,000 people vote. And especially when I got up that day and I saw that it was a rainy, cold, miserable day. So our community, even though it wasn't what most people would consider to be a big turnout for a runoff election, it was a pretty good turnout. And that meant that there were a lot of people out there who were encouraging their friends and neighbors to vote. I've told you before, Phil, I used to teach American government. And so for me, elections are big deals. It's just one of those things that I look at. It's hard for me to understand why anybody doesn't vote. It's a pretty simple thing. It's not, maybe someday it'll be simpler. Maybe someday you'll get an email that says, here's your ballot, vote. But we're not there yet. But it's a pretty easy thing to do. On a bad day, when it's crowded in Ponca City, it might take you 30 minutes in a presidential election. On something like a school board race, probably from the time you walk in the door to the time you walk out, it's probably 5 minutes, and that's if you stop and talk to the poll workers. So, I don't understand. I know that we get into habits of we vote a lot. It's just a school board race. This person's going to win or that person's going to win, or I don't have kids in school, or my vote. All those things that people think about. But the reality is this. When you think about it, when we elect a governor or we elect a president, we have a pretty good turnout here in Ponca City. But the reality is this. If you pick up the phone and try to call Governor Fallon, you're not going to talk to her. You're not going to talk to her. You'll talk to a voice machine, or you'll talk to an you'll talk to somebody, and she can't talk to everybody. But our school board members are the people that are closest to us in this community. And you can pick up the phone and talk to them, or you can see them at a ball game, or you can see them at the grocery store. So you have a chance to interact with them. And so it just always amazes me that the people we have the chance to interact with the most are the ones that we don't bother to turn out and vote for. It's just and it's not Oklahoma, it's not Ponca City, it's across the state, it's across the country. It's just something about us as Americans. It's like there has to be a real divisive issue, or we got to have a lot of commercials on TV that we gripe about before we'll turn out to vote. And for some reason people feel like it's more of a patriotic duty, maybe to vote in a presidential election or a statewide election than it is in a school board election. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what election it is. As citizens, I think we have a duty and responsibility to inform ourselves and then to participate in the election process. But anyway, go back to what I said earlier. Our turnout was about twice of what I thought it would be, and I'm thankful to those people who turned out and vote. And hopefully, when we have our election next year, hopefully maybe turnout will be a little bit better. And there are some changes in the rules that are taking place. There's some legislation that would move the school board race to April on a permanent basis. That may, sometimes in February the weather's not very good, so maybe that might help turn out a little bit. And the idea is to put school board and city council elections together to kind of draw more people out to vote. So we'll see how that works. But again, for those people that turned out to vote, regardless of how you voted, there were a little bit less than 900 people that voted for Mr. Colley, and those folks are to be congratulated for turning out, just like the 12 or 1,300 that turned out to vote for Judy. All those people deserve a pat on the back for doing that.
Absolutely, and it was a close race and a well-fought race. That behind us now, I know that this is a time of year where you do some of the things which almost appear rubber stamp. You look at your principles, you say, yes, we're going to go with those people. And I know that a lot of that you don't talk about, but do you see very many changes in our public schools going into the summer break?
Well, we administratively, we're pretty sure that we're not going to see any big changes administratively. Obviously, we've had a Nancy Neiman retiring in December was a big change. Jean Ganton, our Director of Elementary Curriculum, announced in December that she was retiring this year. So those are big changes. You know, Nancy was a big loss. Losing Jean Gatton is going to be a huge loss. I can't underscore what great work she's done for us as a district, as our director of curriculum in some very difficult times. The whole issue of testing and the emphasis on testing has directly affected what she's done. The Common Core, which is something that Jean's embraced, and she's really been working with our principals and our academic coaches to get our schools ready for this transition. And you know, to the degree that we believe that we're as well prepared as anybody could be for the implementation of the Common Core. We've still got some things we need to do, but at least we've kind of done it in a thoughtful process. We're not just dumping it on everybody at one time. But we think we're ready, and we've already started to change the way we teach. And so you know, Jean deserves a lot of credit for that, and she is going to be greatly missed. We're trying to get her to come back and work for us on a part-time basis. You know, she's trying to decide how that's going to work, and she recently became a grandmother. And one thing I've noticed is that being a grandmother really diverts people's attention from sometimes from the job at hand, and which is you know, I mean, that's for all those grandmothers out there. I think that's a great deal. I'm not picking on grandmas, you know, but being a grandparent's it's a different stage of life, you know. But anyway, so obviously, so Jean. But I think everything else we are having, we've had for this time of year, we seem to have an increase in the number of retirements we've been notified of. It looks like that probably we're going to have maybe a significant amount of retirements out of the high school. We've had some people that have turned their paperwork. We've had some people that are telling us they're going to retire. We haven't seen the paperwork yet. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, that's always a stressor because, you know, our position here has been that anytime a job opens, we're going to look at it very closely to see if we need to replace it. Because our state funding is still less than it was in 2009. And so every position that we have open, we have to really look at that very closely. There are some positions that if we would get our funding back, that we would fill, that we may not fill this year, because we currently have $1.7 million less to spend in this district than we did in 2009, and we have more students, and that's statewide. And so, you know, we have to wait and see what the legislature does. And I'm, as this session goes on, I'm getting more and more concerned about funding. You know, we haven't heard very much. Usually by now we kind of have a pretty good idea of what the dollars are going to be, and they're being pretty tight-lipped about that at the Capitol. Some of our viewers may notice in the news this week that the Senate has kind of backed off their position, which was they would not approve a tax cut unless there was a corresponding amount of tax credit cuts, so that whatever tax cut they did would be revenue neutral. I think most of our viewers would be surprised to know that we spend just about as much of our state budget on tax cuts as we do on every other program in the state. So those are big deals. And, you know, we're already, our funding is 20% less than it was in 2009. And I think that's an astounding number, 20% less. But yet, even though we have less money for our schools and for our highway patrolmen and for our state workers and for DHS and for higher ed and for every other state agency, we're going to talk about cutting taxes. And there are times when tax cuts are justified. You know, the last time we cut taxes in this state was when we had a big increase in revenue. Even though I would have argued back then that our schools weren't adequately funded, we still to some extent we're meeting our budget obligations. But again, we're $200 million less as a state in education, and we're going to cut taxes. And this pipe dream that if we cut taxes, we'll see an increase in revenue. I don't know of any place that it's proven. When you take out the other factors, you know, right now we're hearing a lot about, well, state revenues are up. because we cut taxes in 2009. Well, state revenues are up because in 2009 we were in a, you know, depending on who you want to talk to, either we were in the Great Recession or we were in a mild depression. Well, of course your revenues are going to go up. So you can't attribute that to tax cuts. Bottom line is revenue in Oklahoma is pretty close to where it was in 2009, and I just cannot understand that if revenue's almost back to where it was in 2009, why the level of funding for common education is not almost back to where it was in 2009. You know, I understand that our revenue's not going to get back to where it was until our funding gets back to where it was. So I understand that, but we sure ought to be closer than we are, because the state budget is not 20% less than it was in 2009. And if that's the case, then education funding shouldn't continue to be 20% less. So it's a big deal, which means that we have to, as jobs open, we have to be very careful about what we replace and don't replace, because if we went through and filled all these jobs today and then funding didn't come, if we didn't get any new funding, then we'd find ourselves having to make a reduction in force next year, and nobody wants to do that. So anyway, obviously I'm concerned about our funding, and I'm disappointed that the state Senate has passed a tax cut which will take place in 2015 that is going to affect school funding. And I think the interesting thing that they said about that, if you go back and read the paper, the pro tem said, or the Senate Finance Chairman, which one it was, made the statement that we're delaying the implementation of these tax cuts until 2015 because we have to pay back the oil and gas industry. And I think it's interesting that we're not going to cut taxes today because we have to have the revenue to pay the oil and gas industry back for the tax cuts that they did not get in 2010 and 2011 as a way to shore up the state budget. But we're not concerned about paying back the common schools. We're not concerned about giving DHS the funding they need to implement their court-mandated reforms. So, and I'm not against the oil and gas industry. I know they're an important part of Oklahoma, and I'm all for them. I think it's great when we see those rigs out there drilling oil wells again. I think it's great for the future of our state. But what most people don't realize is that because of a tax exemption that was given several years ago, all these oil wells that are being drilled out here right now, they're not paying taxes on those. The horizontal drilling that they do, they're exempt from, and I forget now what the percentage of money, but basically, if you look at the state revenue, what you'll notice is that the amount of money we're receiving from oil and natural gas is about zero, because the revenue that comes in from those groups is being refunded back to the oil companies. And again, I don't think they're drilling those wells because they're getting a tax break. I think they're drilling those wells because they're going to make lots of money on those wells. So, again, we have lots of needs in this state. I don't think anybody would say that our prisons are funded well. I don't think anybody would say that higher education is funded well. I don't think anybody would say that the Department of Human Services is funded well. And I can tell you that common education isn't funded well. And yet we continue to give tax cuts. And here's the other part of this. The average person in Oklahoma, if when these tax cuts come into play, the average person is going to get about $40 a year. If you make $80,000, if your household income is $80,000 or less, you're going to get about $40 a year back in this tax cut. And to me, that's just ridiculous. The people who are the biggest winners are those that make over $375,000 a year, and they're going to get about $1,000 back. But you know, if you're making $375,000 a year, you don't care about $1,000. So again, it's a tax cut for the sole purpose of giving a tax cut, so that you can, when you run for re-election in 2014, you can say, I voted for a tax cut. The fact that it made a difference in the lives of Oklahomans doesn't seem to matter. And I promise you, those dollars that we're going to lose, that take common education out of it. I promise you, DHS will put that money to good use. Highway patrolmen haven't had a raise in this state in about 6 years. they'll put that money to good use. Transportation would put that money to good use. So we have lots of needs in the state, and I think that we ought to, before we're cutting taxes, we ought to at least get our budget back to where it used to be, and then we can have that discussion.
Speaking of legislation or state representatives, let's talk about something with a little teeth in it, if you will, and that is something I haven't asked you about yet, but South Dakota voted to approve teachers with concealed weapons. Kansas is getting ready to vote on it. Arkansas has a bill before their leaders about it, and I'm not sure that we're at that point in Oklahoma, but do you have a comment that you would like our viewers to know?
Well, the House of Representatives did pass legislation that gave local school districts the option to allow their teachers to arm themselves. That's not going to get out of the Senate. The Senate is going to adopt recommendations based upon the task force that Lieutenant Governor Lamb headed back in January. Phil, I'm strongly opposed to arming school personnel. I think it's a bad idea. Those who are real strong advocates of gun rights argue that banning assault weapons is a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Connecticut. I would argue that arming teachers is just as much as a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Connecticut. Here are the issues the way I see them. We need to find out what is it that causes people to take these actions, whether it's to go into a school and to shoot students, whether it's to go into a mall. If you remember, right before the Sandy Hook incident, there was a gentleman in I think a mall in Colorado, or maybe Ohio, that opened fire and killed lots of people. Were we going to give every person that walks into a mall a gun to walk around in the mall with, so that if somebody, it's the same. You wouldn't do that in a mall. Well, you're not going to do that. You shouldn't do that in a school either. So what about mental health care? We know that mental health care in this state has been neglected for years. We know that because we will have students who need a mental health intervention. And they will be assigned, they will go temporarily to a mental health facility. But they never get all the treatment they receive because there's a limited number of days that somebody can have. And so they come back to us. Sometimes they come back to us and they're better. They've done some adjusted medications, those kinds of things. Sometimes they come back to us and they're not better. So let's develop a robust mental health system that gets individuals the help they need, whether it's medication, whether it's some type of advanced treatment, whether it's just a place to stay, because they've shown that they're not going to take their medication, they're not going to do the things they need to be able to fit into society. So why don't we let's do that. But when you talk about arming teachers, I read in the paper today where a 4-year-old boy, unfortunately, was at a friend or relative's house, and the friend or relative was a county sheriff, I think in Ohio. And this gentleman had a gun out that he was showing some friends of his, and the little boy picked up the gun and fired it, and it killed the guy's wife. That is a trained law enforcement officer, and he had a gun accident. Can you imagine? We got teachers, we give them a gun, we train them, we do that stuff, and so for a year or two they've got that gun on site, got it in a drawer at their desk. But 3 years, 4 years, 5 years out, we're just because people are people. For one moment that teacher has that drawer unlocked, turns to do something, or maybe is called out of the room, and a student's up at the desk, opens the drawer, just being a kid, pulls out the gun and looks at it, and either hurts somebody else or hurts himself. I don't think any of us, again, why why would you create an environment where that situation can happen? The other thing is this, we've had lots of talks with Chief Bohan through this whole process. And when there is an intruder, and I hope that never happens here, but if there is an intruder, and that intruder has a gun, okay, the protocol for the police department is of course they're going to assess this situation. Basically, when there are two officers there, they're going in the building and they're going to take that person out. Well, when those officers are in that building and they know there have been shots fired, they're not, they don't need to be wondering, is that person I see in the hallway with a gun, is that a teacher or is that an intruder? Who is that? And who's to say that you trained somebody in 2011 and in 2016 the intruder shows up, they grab their gun, they go out in the hallway, police officer walks in and tells them to stop or freeze, whatever they would tell them to do, drop, whatever it is. Who's to say that that person who was trained 5 years ago, who's never used that gun since then, is going to do the right thing? And they're not going to end up getting harmed when they're not the bad guy. So, again, for lots of reasons, the safest thing to do is to have better, we're going to improve some security at our buildings. We think that'll be helpful. But at the end of the day, I don't think arming teachers is a good thing. There's been a lot of talk about security guards and should we have a security guard in every building? And, if somebody would provide us for the funding for that, I wouldn't be opposed to it. But the cost to Ponca City to put the same level of person we have now, because we have a resource officer at the high school and we have a resource officer that splits time between east and west. If we were to put a resource officer on every side, we're talking about $1 million a year. My budget is already $1.7 million less than it was in 2009. I don't have $1 million that I can spend on that. Now, the federal government wants to give me $1 million. The state wants to give us an additional $1 million. And give it to us forever. Because typically what they do is they'll give you a grant to do that, and the grant phases out over time, and then you end up eventually paying the full cost. When we first started with resource officers here in Ponca City Schools, it was a grant. And as time has gone on, we've absorbed more and more of those costs, so that now those resource officers are, for all intents and purposes, basically we're paying the full cost of those. So those are concerns, and so. But I'm not opposed to that. But again, but then people have to remember that when you go back to Columbine and you look at the plan that those two young men had drawn up, the very first thing they intended to do when they walked in that building was shoot the resource officer. We had a shooting in California in January this year, and the resource officer in that school, I don't remember now if there was a weather problem and he was late to work because of weather, or if his wife had a doctor. But there was for some reason he was not in the building when the young man walked in with his gun. So again, just because you have those people doesn't mean they're always going to be in the right place. It doesn't mean they're always going to be there. So that's why I say it's a knee-jerk reaction. It makes you feel like you've done something, makes you feel secure. But at the end of the day, it is about better mental health. It is about screening those individuals. It is about being able to identify them. And it's about getting them help. It's about getting them the help that they need.
Absolutely. Well, we've done about 100 of these shows.
Yep.
And for you, our viewers, we find out something we don't know. Our esteemed superintendent doesn't like math, but he's got a son who's a math professor at Kansas State University. I guess the best part of that, he's still a Wildcat. So
he's still a Wildcat. That's more to his more credit to his mother than it is to
me. Thanks for your time. Good luck at the next board meeting. We'll talk to you next month at the end of the school as we get set for the last couple of months of our Ponca City Public Schools. That's the board wrap up for April.